Hello everyone, today we're going to paint a sunrise scene based on this photo, and here is the material list. And then these are the colors I used. So let's first do a minimal drawing. First, you want to lightly mark out the horizon. And if you're not confident in your ability to draw a straight line, just use a ruler. And you don't need to press very hard. If you want, you can lightly suggest the shape of the distant trees. Then mark out the shape of the boat. And here, don't worry too much about, oh, should I draw the head of the person? What is that thing? It's a silhouette, so just make some suggestive shapes. Now I'm going to wet the paper with my Haki brush. Make sure you wet the paper thoroughly, getting into all the corners. So the paper is wet. Let's start painting. And then today I'm only going to use this brush from Miller's Pseudo Sable, and it can soak up a lot of water, but at the same time maintain a very pointed tip. So it's very versatile. So first of all, I'm mixing some moss yellow with transparent orange. And add a little bit flesh tint. I'm using flesh tint, which I don't usually use, is because I ran out of my Chinese white and I want the color to be more muted. So that's the only alternative I have on my plate. You can just add Chinese white. So I'm going to paint the lightest part of the lower sky and leave out the shape of the sun unpainted. And don't worry too much about, oh, whether I am making a perfect round shape, because in the real world there might be clouds covering part of the sky. So don't worry too much. Now I'm adding more orange to the lower part of the sky. Because the paper is wet, you can see the colors blend with each other very well. So I'm going to paint the middle part of the sky. I'm adding a little bit more flesh tint because I want the color to be less saturated and more grayish, because eventually when you go up, it is more of a bluish gray. So I want to create that smoother transition. Apply it across the paper. I'm now painting the top parts of the sky first with lavender. Lavender has a grayish tone in it, so it's very good for painting the top part of the sky. And I will go much deeper later. First, I want to create this smooth transition. So now I'm using more French ultramarine, Payne's gray, adding to the lavender mixture, and trying to make the top of the sky a little bit darker. I also added a little bit alizarin crimson to increase the purplish tone, and I'm also using this mixture to paint some darker clouds. Because orange and blue are complementary colors. So when you mix these colors together, it creates a gray tone, and depending on whether you have more orange or more blue, it might be a cooler or warmer shades of gray. So when you're painting wet in wet, you need to make sure each layer is less damp than the previous one, so that the water wouldn't create cauliflower or background, unless that's the effect you want, but that's not in our case. Now I'm adding a little bit more transparent orange to the darks mixture, because the lower part of the sky is mostly orange, and I want to achieve a better transition. And you need to do this when the paper is still damp. If it's not damp, then you can see the brush strokes instead of having a very smooth transition. You can lift out paint with a dry paper towel, so that you have the complete shape of the sun. And then you can add some darker clouds in the lower part of the sky, or you can wash off the paint, dry it up with your paper towel, and lift out some color. So when your brush is relatively dry, drier than the paper, it is thirsty, so it will soak up the paint on the paper. So I'm lifting out some lighter part in the sky to make it more interesting and lively. As you can see, the lower parts of the sky is already drying up, and when I make these brush strokes, it doesn't create a smooth transition, so I really should stop. Now I'm checking whether the lower part of the paper is still wet. It is not, so I need to re-wet it again. I'm using the same brush. You can also use the Haki brush or a sponge. To paint the lake, we start from the lightest part. So I'm using the same mixture I used to paint the sky. When you are making these horizontal brush strokes, leave out the part that's directly underneath the sun, because that is the reflection of the sun. And you want to make sure these brush strokes vary from each other to create a more natural look of the reflection. So some might be longer and some might be shorter. Now I'm adding more orange colors to this lighter yellow. As you can see, because we re-wet the paper, the colors spurs and merges with each other. So here the paper and the water is doing the work for you. Now I am mixing a gray mixture with lavender, French ultramarine, and the orange mixture. I added a little bit Alizarin crimson. Maybe a little bit more lavender. Now you do the same kind of horizontal brush strokes. You don't need to cover the whole area you painted earlier because you want some yellow and orange colors to shine through. The most distant part, that's right where the distant tree and the mountains are, is very dark. So make sure that part you make a darker line. So now I'm making a darker mixture and adding it to top of the lake or the furthest part of the lake, and also some horizontal strokes to create some darker ripples or lines on the river. And as you can see, this brush has a very pointed tip, so it allows me to create these finer lines without the need to switch to a smaller brush. So this brush is very versatile. And you don't need to worry about where the boat is, because the boat is the darkest part in the painting. It's darker than the lake, so you don't need to worry about that, just brush over. Now I'm checking whether the paper is dry in order to paint the distant trees. I'm making a dark mixture with burnt sienna, French ultramarine, which creates a grayish tone, and adding a little bit Payne's gray to make it even darker. Also a little bit alizarin crimson, why not? As you can see, because the paper is dry, when I make these brush strokes, it creates these dry brush strokes. And here, what you want is make these dry brush strokes on top of these distant trees so that it looks like tree branches. But in the lower part, the mixture can be more dense and damper, because that's probably where the land or the mountains is, so the light doesn't shine through. And right beneath the sun, I didn't paint it completely dark because I want to add some orange to it, because when the sun shines through the branches and leaves, and they actually have a orange tone. And make sure you create a smooth transition with the dark mixture. I didn't mix enough of the dark mixture, so now I have to make more of that, because some parts of the distant mountains and trees are not dark enough or have some gaps. So I'm also making some dry brush strokes to make it more like distant trees. Here you might benefit from using a smaller brush and tilt the brush more. It probably makes a better dry brush stroke effect, but this does the job as well. So now I'm making sure the lower parts of the distant mountains and trees are dark enough. Darker than the darker part of the river or the lake. So the distant trees are done. Now we only have the boat left. First, I need to check whether the paper is dry. It's better to paint it when the paper is dry. I wasn't happy about the edge of the distant mountain, so now I'm trying to smooth it out and straighten it with the tip of my brush. Okay, that's fixed. Now, basically the same dark mixture, French ultramarine, burnt sienna, more French ultramarine, it's a little bit dry, so I'm dipping my brush in the water, so I need to make it darker. Adding a little bit Payne's gray to make it dark. Okay, adding a little bit more burnt sienna to make it warmer. I can still see the silhouette of the boat, so I'm just painting first the body of the boat. This is a easy shape to paint. And then there's something, maybe an engine at the end, and then just make some brush strokes to suggest it's a human sitting there, and then there's something in the front. And there's some other details at the top of the boat. Don't worry too much about what they are, just make some suggestive brush strokes. And then we need to paint the reflection. I want the reflection to transition much smoother with the river or with the lake, so I am damping my brush and lightly brush over the reflection. So the line is much softer. As you can see, my brush is much bigger than the shape of the boat, but it is able to make these fine lines, so I'm very pleasantly surprised. And I think I make the tip of the reflection a little bit too dark, so now I'm just smoothing it out so that it is even. And I think that is it. The painting is done. Last thing I need to do is to sign. I hope you've enjoyed the video and try it yourself. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to click like and subscribe.